The jungle moon of Vareth 9 was not a place for the weak. Its air was thick and warm, heavy with the smell of alien flowers and damp soil. Its trees grew so tall that their tops disappeared into low green clouds. Strange creatures called out from the shadows between the roots. The sky above was a deep amber color, lit by two distant suns that never quite set at the same time. Sergeant Caleb Rourke had seen a lot of strange places in his career. He had served on frozen asteroid stations where the walls cracked from the cold. He had walked through the ruins of a bombed-out colony on a red desert planet. He had survived 3 interstellar conflicts, 2 enemy ambushes, and 1 very bad week involving a malfunctioning escape pod and a swarm of space jellyfish. Varath 9 was strange, but it was manageable, or so he thought. Caleb arrived at the joint outpost on a Tuesday morning. At least it was Tuesday by his personal calendar. The outpost itself was a wide, well-organized compound built from gray metal panels and surrounded by tall security fencing. Flags from 5 different species flew at the entrance. Soldiers from various worlds moved through the courtyard in organized patterns. It looked professional, peaceful even. He had been assigned here for a 6-month peacekeeping rotation. Simple patrol duties, monitoring wildlife boundaries, making sure no faction crossed into restricted zones. His commanding officer, Major Hendricks, had described it as a quiet posting during the assignment briefing back on Earth. Caleb should have known better. Nothing in the military was ever actually quiet. He dropped his bag in his assigned quarters, on a small room with a narrow bed and a window that overlooked the eastern tree line. He splashed water on his face, changed into a fresh uniform, and reported to Major Hendricks' office as instructed. The major was a tall woman with short gray hair and the permanent expression of someone who had been dealing with complicated problems for 20 years. She was standing behind her desk when Caleb entered, and she was looking at a data pad with the specific kind of focused silence that meant she was choosing her next words very carefully. "Sergeant Rourke," she said, setting the pad down. "Good, you're here. Close the door." Caleb closed the door and stood at attention. "At ease. Sit down." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I need to tell you something that was not included in your assignment documents. Yet I want you to listen fully before you respond." Caleb sat down. "Understood, Major." She clasped her hands on the desk and looked at him directly. "Are you familiar with the term ardent season?" He thought for a moment. "Vaguely. Something biological. Applies to a few alien species. Several, actually. And as of 3 days ago, 4 species stationed at this outpost have entered that cycle simultaneously." She paused. "This has never happened before at a joint posting. The timing is considered extremely rare. The science team believes it is connected to a specific alignment of Vareth 9's twin suns." Caleb nodded slowly. "Okay. And what does that mean for base operations?" The major's expression shifted in a way that was difficult to read. It was somewhere between professional calm and genuine apology. "During the ardent season, the females of these 4 species follow deep biological instinct. Their focus shifts toward finding a strong and compatible partner." She picked up the data pad again and turned it to face him. On the screen was a detailed scientific chart, and at the top of the chart was a species label that read Homo sapiens, compatibility rating, universal. Caleb stared at the screen for a long moment. "Universal," he repeated. "Across all 4 species, yes. Human males produce a combination of pheromone signals that, according to the joint science team, register as compatible to every one of them during this cycle." She set the pad back down. "You are currently the only human male on this outpost." The room was very quiet. Outside the window, Caleb could hear the normal sounds of the base. Boots on metal walkways, a distant generator humming. The call of something large moving through the jungle beyond the fence. "How long does the season last?" he asked. 7 days? And the 4 species? The Major folded her hands again. The Vaithari, the Lumini, the Koravel, and the Solhari. She held his gaze steadily. Sergeant, I want to be clear that none of these individuals would ever act improperly or without respect. They are all professional soldiers and valued allies. However, during the ardent season, their instinct to pursue a compatible match becomes very strong. And since you are present on this base, you have become the focus of that instinct. Caleb absorbed this information like a man absorbing the news that his parachute had a small but significant design flaw. So what's the protocol? He asked. The Major opened her desk drawer and placed 3 items in front of him. A folded map of Vareth 9's jungle interior, a sealed pack of 7 days of field rations, a standard military comm unit. The outpost is restricted to you for the next 7 days, she said. You are an experienced field soldier. The jungle is surveyed but wild. I suggest you move quickly. Caleb picked up the map slowly. You're telling me to hide. I'm telling you to exercise your field survival skills, she said carefully, in a direction away from this building. He stood up, picked up all 3 items, and walked to the door. Before he opened it, he looked back at her one more time. Major, is there anything else I should know? She considered the question for just a moment too long. They're very good at tracking, she said. Caleb opened the door and walked out into the amber-lit courtyard of the outpost. Across the open ground, near the Eastern Equipment Station, 4 figures stood in a loose and unplanned group. They were not together by design. They had simply all ended up in the same place at the same moment, each scanning the courtyard with calm, focused attention. The Vaithari was tall, scaled, and still as a stone pillar, her sharp eyes moving in slow, deliberate arcs. The Lumini glowed faintly at her edges, soft blue light pulsing in a slow rhythm, her head tilted as though listening to something no one else could hear. The Koravel stood with the precise stillness of someone who had already finished calculating something important. The Solhari was the largest of them, broad-shouldered and woven through with the quiet green of living things, and her expression calm and patient in the way that ancient trees are patient. None of them had seen him yet. Then the Vaithari turned her head. Her eyes found him across the courtyard with the clean, direct accuracy of a targeting system, locking on. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply looked at him, and the look said everything. Caleb tucked the map under his arm, gripped the rations in one hand and the comm unit in the other, and walked toward the jungle gate at a pace that was professional and dignified and absolutely as fast as he could manage without breaking into a full run. He was through the gate in under a minute. Behind him, he heard 4 sets of footsteps begin to move. He ran. Caleb had a 3-minute head start. In military terms, 3 minutes was either plenty of time or absolutely nothing, depending entirely on who was chasing you. Against an untrained opponent, 3 minutes meant safety. Against a trained one, it meant you needed to be very, very smart with every second. He did not know yet what he was dealing with, but he intended to find out the hard way. The jungle swallowed him fast. Within 60 seconds of passing through the outpost gate, the metal fencing had disappeared behind a wall of thick green. The trees here were enormous, their roots rising out of the ground like the walls of small rooms. Vines hung in dense curtains between the trunks. The light filtered down in broken amber pieces, casting long, uneven shadows across the mossy floor. Caleb moved quickly but carefully. He was not panicking. Panic was the first thing a soldier learned to put aside, because panic made noise, and then noise was the enemy of survival. He pulled out the map as he moved and read it with the practiced speed of someone who had memorized dozens of terrain layouts under far worse conditions. The jungle interior stretched for roughly 40 kilometers before hitting the central ridge. There were 2 river systems, one running east and one cutting north. There was a marked high ground area about 6 kilometers in, a natural rock shelf that rose above the canopy line. That was his first destination. He needed elevation. He needed to see the terrain clearly, pick a defensible shelter location, and set up a perimeter before nightfall. The amber sky of Varath 9 darkened fast. He had maybe 4 hours of usable light. He moved. By the time darkness settled over the jungle, Caleb had covered 8 kilometers and built himself a shelter that would have impressed his old survival instructor back on Earth. He had chosen a position high in the canopy, wedged between 3 thick branches of an enormous tree whose bark was rough enough to grip without slipping. The shelter was small and flat, covered with large leaves layered in a pattern that shed rain and broke up the outline of a human shape from below. He had used mud from the riverbank to mask his scent, mixed with a particular purple-leafed plant whose smell the base botanist had once mentioned was common enough in this jungle to register as background noise to most native species. He had laid 4 simple perimeter alarms around the base of the tree, thin wire pulled from his field kit, strung at ankle height between the roots, and connected to small metal pieces that would shift and click if disturbed. He ate half a ration bar, drank carefully from his filtered canteen, and allowed himself exactly 1 hour of sleep. It was, by any reasonable measure, an excellent setup. Day 2 passed without incident. Then Day 3 began, and the situation changed. It started with the first shelter. Caleb had built a secondary ground-level shelter 2 kilometers from his tree position. A deliberate decoy, rough enough to look real, but positioned badly, near a game trail where large creatures moved at night. Any intelligent tracker would find it and read it as an amateur mistake. He returned to check it from a safe distance on the morning of Day 3. It had been found and dismantled, not destroyed. Dismantled. Each piece had been carefully removed and set aside in a neat arrangement, the way someone takes apart a mechanism they find interesting. At the center of where the shelter had stood, scratched into the soft earth, were 4 words in standard interstellar script. Good work. Keep going. Caleb stared at the message for a long moment. Then he looked around the tree line very carefully, saw nothing, and moved in the opposite direction. That evening he felt it. He was sitting in his canopy shelter, perfectly still, watching the jungle floor below through a gap in the leaves. There was nothing there. No movement, no sound out of place. But there was something. A feeling. Warm and close. Like someone had just been standing in the room before you walked in. Like the air itself remembered a presence. He shifted his position quietly, and the feeling followed him, not in a threatening way, but in the way that a shadow follows a light source, soft, patient. He did not sleep well that night. The Coravel was the one he almost walked into directly. On the morning of Day 4, Caleb had identified what he believed was a completely untouched section of jungle, a dense cluster of giant ferns near the northern river that showed no signs of recent movement. He had planned his next shelter there, had already begun moving toward it with quiet confidence. He stopped at the edge of the fern cluster and listened. Silence. He took 1 more step and looked through the gap in the ferns. Tix was sitting cross-legged on a flat rock in the center of the clearing, a data pad in her hands, reading. She had set up a small camp with the calm efficiency of someone who had been there for hours, and she did not look up immediately. Then, without raising her eyes from the pad, she spoke in clear, standard interstellar language. I calculated your next 4 likely positions, she said simply. This was the 4th. I decided to wait here rather than waste energy on the first 3. Caleb stared at her. She looked up. Her compound eyes caught the filtered amber light in small, fractured pieces. You are welcome to sit, she added, or you can run. I have already updated my model either way. He ran. The evening of Day 4 was when everything became serious. Caleb was checking his perimeter alarms at the base of his current tree, moving quietly in the last gray light before full dark. He checked the north wire, tripped and reset. He checked the east wire, tripped and reset. He checked the south wire, tripped and reset. He moved to the west wire, tripped and reset. He stood completely still in the center of his four-sprung perimeter alarms and looked slowly in each direction. The jungle looked back at him with absolute calm. 4 directions, 4 triggers, all sprung within what must have been minutes of each other. He pulled out his comm unit and stared at it. He thought about calling Major Hendricks. He thought about what she would say. He remembered the sound of her almost apology voice during the briefing and decided against it. He folded the map, tightened the strap of his ration pack, and looked out at the dark jungle pressing in from all 4 sides. "Okay," he said quietly to no one in particular. New plan. Caleb moved before the sun rose. He was already packed and climbing down from his tree position in the dark, moving by memory and the faint, bioluminescent glow of certain jungle plants that lined the ground like dim blue lanterns. He had made his decision during the night, lying flat on his canopy shelf and staring up at the alien sky through gaps in the leaves. The jungle was no longer working in his favor. He needed a new battlefield. The ruins were his answer. He had found them during his very first week on Verath 9, back when the posting had still felt routine, and he had nothing better to do than explore the surrounding terrain during off-duty hours. Most soldiers spent that time in the common room. Caleb spent it mapping things. Old habit. Good habit, as it turned out. The ruins sat at the base of the central ridge, about 14 kilometers from the outpost, and they belonged to a civilization that had lived on this moon thousands of years before any current species arrived. Nobody knew much about them. The science teams had cataloged the site and then largely ignored it, more interested in the living jungle than the dead stones. But Caleb had walked every corridor. He had sketched every chamber in his personal field notebook. He knew which floors were stable, which walls had gaps large enough to move through, which underground passages connected to which exits. He knew those ruins the way a person knows their own home in the dark. That knowledge, right now, was worth more than any weapon. He set his course and moved fast through the pre-dawn jungle, leaving a deliberately messy trail for the first 2 kilometers before doubling back and taking a completely different route. An old trick. Simple, but effective. It would cost his pursuers at least an hour. He needed every minute. The ruins appeared through the trees just as the first sun climbed above the ridgeline. They were impressive even in silence. Great stone walls covered in thick moss, archways that still stood after thousands of years, towers that had half collapsed into elegant angles. The main structure ran deep into the ridge itself, becoming an underground network of chambers and corridors that stretched further than any surface view suggested. Caleb moved inside without hesitation. The air changed immediately. Cooler, darker, carrying the smell of old stone and damp earth. His boots made soft sounds on the flat floor. He oriented himself quickly from memory, turned left at the second archway, moved through a low corridor that opened into a wide chamber, and found the stairway that led down to the underground level. He descended. Below ground, the ruins became a proper maze. Corridors branched in unexpected directions. Some rooms had 2 exits, some had none. Certain passages looped back on themselves. The floor levels changed without warning, dropping half a meter or rising sharply. There were underground waterways threading through the lower sections, shallow but moving, which would break any scent trail completely. Caleb set up his base in a chamber he had privately named the Hub during his earlier explorations. It was a round room near the center of the underground network, with 5 different exits and a natural air shaft that brought fresh air down from the surface without creating a visible opening at ground level. He ate a ration bar, drank some water, then allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. Let them find him now. They found him faster than he expected. Zara reached the ruins first. She was extraordinary in open jungle, but even she slowed inside the stone corridors where heat signatures scattered off ancient walls and broken ground disrupted her tracking patterns. Caleb heard her moving twice and used his knowledge of the layout to slip through a connecting passage she did not know existed. He was 3 rooms ahead before she stopped. Then her voice came through the stone, calm and clear, traveling along the corridor walls the way sound always does in old enclosed spaces. "You built the first shelter facing south?" she said. "Most soldiers face their shelters east. You knew the morning light would expose an east-facing position. That was smart." A pause. I had to think about it for a while." Caleb pressed his back against the wall of the next chamber and said nothing. "I have been tracking targets for 11 years, Zara continued. "You are the most interesting one." Another pause. "I am not saying that to make you stop running. Run if you want. I am just saying it." Caleb stayed quiet for another moment. Then he moved deeper into the ruins. Essia was harder to avoid because she did not track the way the others did. She did not follow footprints or heat or logic patterns. She followed feeling. And feelings, unlike footprints, do not stop at a false trail or double back on themselves. Caleb was crossing one of the underground waterways in the lower corridor when he became aware of her. Not through any sound or sight, simply through the air changing in a particular way, he becoming warmer and quieter at the same time, like the moment just before someone speaks in a still room. "You are not truly afraid." Her voice came softly from somewhere behind him in the dark. It echoed gently off the water. "I can feel that clearly. You are focused, determined, a little tired." A soft pause. "But not afraid of us." Caleb kept moving through the water, boots soaked, not answering. "That is unusual," Essia said quietly. "Most beings are afraid of what they do not understand. You are just solving a problem." The warmth in the air shifted slightly. "I find that very interesting about your kind." He climbed out of the waterway on the far side and kept moving without looking back. The trick he played on Tix was his personal favorite moment of the entire week. Tix had modeled his behavior patterns with impressive accuracy. She had predicted correctly that he would use the ruins. She had predicted correctly that he would stay near the center of the underground network. She had even predicted correctly which of the 5 exits from his hub chamber he would use most often. So Caleb used the one she had rated as least likely. Not once. Every single time. On the 3rd day inside the ruins, he found a note on a flat stone near the waterway. It was written in precise small letters on a torn piece of datapad paper. "You have now used exit 4 7 consecutive times. The probability of this being random is 0.003%. You are doing this deliberately to break my model. This is noted. Adjusting." Below that, after a small gap, in slightly less precise handwriting, it was a good move. Caleb read it twice, and then folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. Mava never announced herself. She left no words, sent no sounds through the stone corridors. She simply left things. Every morning, without fail, there was something small placed just outside whatever chamber Caleb was sleeping in. A bundle of woven vines twisted into a neat shape. A cluster of small glowing flowers arranged in a careful circle. Once, a broad, flat leaf folded into the shape of a simple shelter, placed upright against the doorway like a small, quiet joke. He never heard her, never saw her. She moved through the ruins like the ruins themselves were part of her. He started leaving things in return. A smooth stone. A piece of folded wrapper from his rations shaped into a flat triangle. Small acknowledgments. He was not entirely sure when that started feeling natural. But it did. On the 5th day, 3 things happened in quick succession. First, Caleb discovered that Zara had found his hub chamber and quietly mapped all 5 exits while he was in the lower waterway section. Second, he came around a corner in the upper corridor and very nearly walked directly into HFY, who was standing in the passage looking at a piece of carved stone on the wall with genuine curiosity. They stared at each other for 2 full seconds before he turned and walked rapidly back the way he had come. Third, and most significantly, he heard voices. 4 voices, coming from the large surface chamber at the ruins entrance. He crept close enough to listen without being seen. Through a gap in the crumbled wall, he could see all 4 of them standing in the amber light of the entrance. They had found each other. Not they were talking. The conversation was careful at first, the way conversations are between people who did not expect to be sharing the same situation. Then the tone shifted. He watched Tix pull out her datapad and show something to Zara. He watched Zara study it and nod once, slowly. He watched Isia look toward the interior of the ruins with that quiet, listening expression she always carried. He watched Mava simply stand with her arms folded, patient as a tree. Then all 4 of them looked toward the interior of the ruins at the same time. Caleb pulled back from the gap in the wall. He had 2 days left, and they were working together now. Caleb did not sleep well that night. He lay in his hub chamber with his back against the cool stone wall and his eyes on the ceiling, listening to the deep quiet of the ruins around him. The underground was never fully silent. Water moved somewhere in the lower passages. Stones settled with soft occasional sounds. The air shaft above his head carried distant jungle noise down in slow waves. But beneath all of that, he could feel the change. They were organized now. 4 different kinds of intelligence, 4 different sets of skills, all pointed in the same direction. Zara's tracking ability combined with Ezia's emotional awareness, combined with Tix's predictive modeling, combined with Mava's connection to every living thing in the ground above him. He ran the numbers honestly in his head, the way a good soldier always does before making a decision. The odds of staying hidden for 2 more days had dropped significantly. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. By morning, he had made his decision. Now, it was not the decision most people would expect from a decorated military sergeant who had spent 5 days successfully evading 4 expert pursuers through hostile alien terrain. It was not a plan involving further escape routes or new deception tactics or emergency comm calls to Major Hendricks. It was simpler than that. He was going to walk out and talk to them, not because he was giving up. Caleb Rourke did not give up, but because he had been lying in that stone chamber thinking carefully, and he had arrived at a conclusion that felt more true the longer he examined it. Running was a response to fear. He was not afraid of them. He had never been afraid of them. He had been overwhelmed, yes. Caught off guard, absolutely. But fear was a different thing, and he knew the difference better than most. These were not enemies. They were people. Complicated, capable, biologically driven people who were operating under pressures they had not chosen, in a situation none of them had planned for. And somewhere in the last 5 days, between Zara's message in the earth and Tix's adjusted model note, and Ezia's quiet voice in the dark waterway, and Mava's small morning offerings outside his door, he had understood something important. They were not trying to corner him. They were trying to reach him. There was a meaningful difference, and it deserved a meaningful response. He packed his kit, ate the last of his current ration bar, and climbed up through the ruins toward the surface. He found them in the wide riverside clearing just east of the main ruins entrance. They had made a simple camp there, the 4 separate positions arranged in a loose circle around a flat central stone, which suggested they were cooperating but had not yet fully merged their individual approaches. Smart, respectful of each other's space. He noted that with quiet appreciation. They saw him the moment he stepped out of the tree line. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The 4 of them watched him cross the clearing with the careful attention of people who were not sure what was happening and were choosing not to react until they understood it better. Caleb walked to the flat central stone. sat down on it, set his pack beside him, and looked at them. "I would like to talk," he said clearly, "if that is acceptable." A long moment passed. Then Zara moved first, crossing the clearing with her usual quiet economy of motion and sitting on a root across from him. Edisia drifted closer, like light moving across water, settling a short distance to his left. Tix approached precisely, chose a specific flat stone that appeared to be exactly equidistant from all other parties, and sat down with her data pad resting on her knee. Mava walked over last, slow and unhurried, and stood slightly behind the others with her arms loose at her sides. Caleb looked at each of them in turn. "I understand what this week has been," he said. "I understand the season and what it means biologically. I am not going to pretend otherwise." He kept his voice steady and respectful. "But I want to be honest with all of you. I am a person, not a target, and I think you know that. I think you have known that the whole time." Nobody argued with that. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "So I want to ask each of you something directly. Not what your instincts are telling you right now. I mean what you actually want, from yourselves. What do you actually want from this situation?" The clearing was quiet for a moment. Then Zara spoke. "The chase," she said, without hesitation or embarrassment. "That is the truth of it. I am a hunter by training and by nature. I have tracked targets across 6 different worlds. None of them made me work the way you did this week." She looked at him directly. "You read terrain the way my own kind does. You left false trails that took me genuine time to untangle. The shelter decoy was well constructed." A pause. "I wanted to find you, because finding you meant something. It was not simple." Caleb nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." Essia spoke next, and her voice soft and carrying a quality that seemed to settle the air around it. "I felt you from the first day," she said. "Not your location, your presence, the emotional texture of you." She tilted her head slightly. "Your kind carries a great deal inside. Memories, worries, hopes, all running at the same time, underneath the surface. It is very loud, emotionally speaking, even when you are physically silent." She paused. "But there is also something very steady at the center of it. I have not encountered that quality often. It drew me." The clearing held the words carefully. Tix looked up from her data pad. "I will be direct," she said, in the tone of someone who was always direct and considered this a courtesy rather than a warning. "I was drawn by the anomaly. You behave in ways that my models could not fully predict. You made irrational choices that produced rational outcomes. That combination does not occur frequently." She paused precisely. "I would like to study your decision-making process further, in a structured and respectful setting." Another pause. "Professionally." Caleb kept his expression steady. "Noted." Everyone looked at Mava. Mava was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped forward, reached into the woven bag at her side, and set something carefully on the flat stone beside Caleb. It was a small bundle of Verath flowers, the same kind she had been leaving outside his chamber door every morning. She arranged them neatly, straightened one stem that was leaning sideways, and stepped back. Then she looked at him. That was her answer. Caleb looked down at the flowers and back up at her. There's something about the simplicity of it settled in his chest in a way he had not expected. He took a breath. "Here is what I can offer," he said. "I have 2 days left on this posting restriction. I am not going to spend them running." He looked around the circle at all 4 of them. "I will share meals with you. I will sit with you, talk with you, let you ask whatever questions you want to ask. I will be honest and I will be present." He paused. "What I am asking in return is to be treated as a person who is choosing to be here, not a target that has been caught." The distinction mattered. He could tell from the way the clearing responded to it that all four of them understood exactly what he meant. Zara looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, with the weight of someone who respected terms when they were fairly set. Isia smiled, and the soft glow at her edges warmed slightly. Tix opened a new page on her datapad and began writing something. She said nothing, but her posture shifted into something more settled. Mava sat down on the ground near the flat stone, cross-legged and calm, and looked out at the river with the expression of someone who had been waiting patiently for something to arrive and was now content that it had. Caleb reached into his pack and pulled out his remaining ration portions, spreading them on the flat stone between all of them. It was not much, but it was a beginning. The last 2 days passed differently than the first 5. There was no running, no false trails, no perimeter alarms or canopy shelters or messages scratched into soft earth. And the riverside clearing became a quiet meeting ground where 5 very different people sat together in the amber light of Vareth 9's twin suns and did something that none of them had entirely planned for. They talked. The first evening was careful. Conversation started small, the way they always do between people who do not yet know how much space the other person needs. Zara asked practical questions about human military training. How long? How physical? What the failure rate was. Caleb answered honestly and asked about Vithari combat schools in return. She described them with the direct pride of someone who had earned every rank they carried. He listened with genuine respect. Tix asked questions from a prepared list that she had apparently been building since day 2 of the chase, and the questions were precise and occasionally startling in their specificity. She wanted to know the exact reasoning behind 7 particular decisions Caleb had made during the week. He walked through each one. Sometimes she nodded, sometimes she made a small sound that suggested his reasoning had not matched her model. Once, after his explanation of the Exit 4 strategy, she was quiet for a full minute before writing something lengthy on her pad. "You chose irrationality as a rational tool," she said finally. "I chose unpredictability," he said. "There is a difference." She wrote that down too. Ezia mostly listened during the first evening. She sat close enough to participate, but did not push conversation. Occasionally, she would say something quiet that landed with unexpected accuracy, observations about what someone was actually feeling beneath what they were saying. Not invasively, just gently, the way someone might point out a thing that everyone had noticed, but nobody had said aloud. At one point, she looked at Caleb across the small fire Zara had built and said, "You were lonely before this week, not the week itself. Before. The posting." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "It is a quiet outpost," he said. Essia nodded and did not push further, but the observation sat in the air between them with the comfortable weight of something true. Mava cooked. Nobody had asked her to, and nobody had expected it. But she disappeared into the jungle edge for 20 minutes on the first evening, and returned with several things Caleb could not identify, which she prepared over the fire in a way that suggested long practice. Whatever she made was served on broad, flat leaves and tasted extraordinary. Caleb ate 2 portions and did not ask what was in it on the grounds that the answer might be complicated. She watched him eat with quiet satisfaction. The second day opened up. Something about having survived the first evening made the second day easier. The careful politeness softened into something more natural. Zara challenged Caleb to a tracking exercise in the jungle edge, not a chase, just a skills comparison, moving through the same terrain and comparing methods. He learned 3 things from her that he immediately recognized as better than his own techniques. She learned 2 things from him. Neither of them said anything about this directly, but both of them knew it had happened. Tix asked if she could conduct a formal interview in the afternoon. Caleb agreed. She asked 94 questions over 2 hours. He answered all of them. At question 71, which was about whether humans experienced fear differently than other species, He gave an answer that made her stop writing and simply look at him for a moment. "We feel it the same way," he said. "We just decided a long time ago not to let it make decisions for us." She looked at that answer for a while. "That is either very wise or very dangerous," she said. "Usually both," he said. She wrote it down. In the late afternoon, Caleb sat near the river while the light turned gold, and Mava sat beside him in her unhurried way. They did not talk much. She wove things with her hands while she sat, long river grass twisted into careful shapes. He watched the water. At some point, she placed one of her woven shapes on the stone between them without comment. He picked it up and looked at it. It was a small figure, rough but recognizable. A person standing upright, arms slightly out, in the posture of someone who had just stopped running and decided to stay. He held it carefully. "Thank you," he said. She looked at the river and said nothing, but the green living light that moved slowly through her shifted warmer for a moment. On the morning of the 7th day, Caleb packed his kit and walked back to the outpost. The four of them walked with him to the jungle gate, not escorting him, simply walking the same direction at the same pace. When the metal gate came into view through the last of the trees, they stopped at the jungle edge. He kept walking, then paused and turned, and they were standing in a line at the tree line. Four very different people, all of them looking at him with expressions that were different in their specifics, but carried the same quality underneath. He raised one hand. All four of them raised a hand in return. He walked through the gate. Major Hendricks was waiting in the courtyard. She looked him over with the careful eye of a commanding officer checking for damage. He was muddy, tired, slightly thinner from a week of field rations, and carrying a small woven figure in his left hand, otherwise intact. "Sergeant Rourke," she said. "Major," he said. A pause. "How was the week?" she asked, in the tone of someone who genuinely did not know what answer to expect. Caleb considered the question honestly. "Educational," he said, and she looked at the woven figure in his hand and then back at his face. Something in her expression shifted toward the careful neutrality of someone choosing not to ask follow-up questions. "Debrief in 1 hour," she said. "Yes, Major." The debrief lasted 3 hours. Hendricks took notes with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that what had happened this week was not standard and would need to be documented carefully. Caleb told her everything in plain language. The shelters, the false trails, the ruins, the underground waterways, the conversations in the dark corridors, the riverside clearing, the 2 final days. When he finished, she set her pen down and looked at her notes for a long moment. "You evaded 4 specialist-level trackers for 5 days using field survival training and basic field kit," she said. "Yes, Major. And then you resolved the situation by sitting down and having an honest conversation." "Yes, Major." Another pause. "I am going to have difficulty writing this report in a way that command will receive without significant confusion," she said. "I understand, Major." She picked up her pen again. "Dismissed, Sergeant." The report did not stay classified. It moved through interstellar military channels, the way interesting things always do, quietly at first and then everywhere at once. Officers passed it along with brief notes attached. Science teams referenced it in papers. At least 3 alien universities requested copies. The part that traveled furthest was a single paragraph near the end of Hendricks's report, in which she summarized the outcome of the week in plain language. It described how one human soldier, with no support and limited supplies, had successfully evaded 4 apex-level pursuers through hostile alien terrain using only field training and adaptability, and had then resolved a complex interspecies situation not through force or further evasion, but through direct and respectful communication. Her final line read, "In my assessment, Sergeant Rourke demonstrated the quality that appears most consistently across human military personnel and most consistently surprises allied species: the ability to treat an overwhelming situation as simply another problem to be solved, and to solve it with both competence and decency. That line was quoted in papers, discussions, and at least one speech at an interstellar diplomatic conference. Zara submitted a formal request to the Joint Military Board for a human Vithari combat exchange program, and the request cited specific field techniques observed during the week and described the value of cross-training with a species that approached terrain differently than any Vithari-trained soldier. The board approved it within a month. Tix published her behavioral study 6 weeks later. It was titled Irrational Decision Patterns in Homo Sapiens as Adaptive Strategy, a Field Observation. It ran to 240 pages. The acknowledgement section contained one line. Subject was cooperative, honest, and consistently surprising. Further study is recommended. It became required reading at 3 alien universities within a year. Essia sent Caleb a message 2 months after the posting ended. It was short. She described what the moons looked like from her homeworld that evening. A small, quiet observation with no particular purpose beyond the sharing of it. He wrote back the same day. The messages continued after that, arriving every few weeks. Small, ordinary things about ordinary days. They were, in their own way, the most genuinely human correspondence he maintained during his entire military career. Mava sent a package. It arrived at his next posting 6 weeks after he left Verath 9, wrapped carefully in treated jungle leaf. Inside was a living wreath of Verath flowers, the same small, glowing blooms she had left outside his chamber door every morning in the ruins. They had been woven into a circle and rooted in a small amount of native soil, packed carefully enough to survive the journey. There was no note. There did not need to be. The wreath sat on his desk for the remainder of his military career. The flowers stayed alive. Base botanists who saw it could not explain how jungle flora from Verath 9 survived indefinitely in a standard military outpost environment. Caleb never tried to explain it either. Some things, he had decided, were fine to simply accept. On his last day at that posting, before his reassignment orders came through, Caleb walked to the base mission board and pinned a single handwritten note to it. It read, "Survived. Made friends. Would not recommend the experience. Would absolutely do it again. Sergeant C. Rourke." The note stayed on that board for 3 years after he left. Nobody took it down.